Who knows who Robert E. Howard is?
Oh, that's.
Who's heard of Conan the Barbarian? Yeah, Robert E. Howard invented that guy.
That's right.
Howard and Lovecraft were pals, and one of the interesting things about Lovecraft and his buddies is they all shared each other's fictional creations. They weren't real concerned about a lot of this copyright stuff, at least amongst themselves.
Yeah.
Who's heard of Robert Bloch? Who's seen the movie Psycho? Alfred Hitchcock version.
There you go.
Bloch wrote that.
That's right.
Okay, he's about to be on coming online, but Mike, you can talk to.
Hello, Daniel.
Hi, you've reached David Terry. I'm not available at the moment. Leave a message and I'll call you back.
I don't think that's him.
I don't think so.
I think that's another number.
We're almost there.
You'll edit that out, right?
Nice hair color. Really? You must leave a message. Yes.
Hello, Daniel. This is Regis Philbin with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. We've got two contestants here who have phoned a friend. Actually, no, this is the PhreakNIC conference, and we're dialing you in for the copyright of Cthulhu.
Okay.
Applaud!
Applaud! We have hundreds of adoring fans here who are waiting to hear from you. So for those who have just joined us, the next presentation coming up is the copyright of Cthulhu. Up here we have Johnny Christ, Pope Johnny Christ, and we have Lord Draco. And on the phone we have Daniel Harms. We'll now hand it over to the... I'm sorry?
Hello.
Hello. Oh, yes, hello. We'll actually let him talk. So I'm going to hand this over to our participants and enjoy the show.
Give me the bloody mic. All right. Yes, welcome to the copyright of Cthulhu. I have here with me today Dr. JonnyX, alias, can I give you a proper name, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Drew Myers, who is a
Doctor in Christ.
infamous, well, I thought you were only a pope, infamous Lovecraft collector, an amateur Lovecraft scholar, sci-fi collector, and writer of RPGs. And we also have with us today Mr. Daniel Harms, co-author of this swell book, The Necronomicon Files, also a Lovecraft scholar. And he's represented by this attractive South Park caricature here and a staticky voice on the phone. I'm John Gauntz, and I'm also co-author of this swell book, Necronomicon Files, of which I just happen to have 2 clean copies that are on sale today at an author's discount of only $20. Looking for a keynote for this here talk, I was led to the works of Charles Pellegrino, author of Return to Sodom and Gomorrah. Charles Pellegrino started out as an astrophysicist, got interested in paleontology, then got interested in archaeology, and now spends much of his time digging up ancient civilizations in war zones. Most of the best archaeological sites are in war zones, as some of you probably know. And Pellegrino went on record as saying, I'm actually more comfortable in the war zones than I am returning to so-called civilization, where I have to deal with lawyer types who think they have a copyright on the Dead Sea Scrolls. So with that thought in mind, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Drew Myers.
Thank you, sir. Daniel, when you see the image we've created to represent you, I want you to keep in mind that my first choice was to put an inflatable sex sheep with your name on the table here. and that was vetoed by friends and associates of yours, and I just didn't have time to whip up a convincing MyGo brain cylinder, so I hope you will be happy with your South Park character.
Which South Park character am I?
We created a custom one for you. He's a little dude whose blonde hair is standing up in horror, and he has a terrified expression on his face, and he's reading a book that has weird runes on it, and it's creepy, and it's night out.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Danny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, because you're actually far more published than I am, and you're even more published than Lord Draco is.
Okay. My name's Dan Harms, and I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. I'm the author of the Encyclopedia Cthulhuiana, and I'm the co-author with John of Necronomicon Files. And right now I'm a librarian in upstate New York.
Okay, that'll work.
Yeah.
All right, we've got more people in the room here now, so we'll ask this question again when we were stalling for time earlier. Hands up, who's heard of H.P. Lovecraft? Who knows who he is? And I assume y'all like his fiction, you've read his stuff. Who plays Call of Cthulhu? RPG. Okay. Say again? Once? All right, we have a few people here. Anyone play Delta Green, put out by Pagan Publishing? We know who that is? A couple of folks, cool. We're going to be talking about gaming stuff, the fiction, and not just Lovecraft, but his contemporaries as well. We had mentioned Robert E. Howard, creator of Conan the Barbarian, Call, and various other characters. Clark Ashton Smith was another friend of Lovecraft's. We've mentioned Robert Bloch and Frank Belknap Long. These guys all basically wrote stories using each other's characters' ideas, works pretty freely, and they created what is currently known as the Cthulhu mythos.
One reason for Lovecraft's popularity is actually his generosity, because he shared his Cthulhu mythos ideas with his friends and convinced them to go ahead and write about them. Everybody was fond of Lovecraft. They couldn't stand to see his work be lost after he died, and two of his friends started a publishing house, Arkham House, to keep his works alive between hard covers. That's probably why we have them today.
Lovecraft, as I said, has influenced pretty much every horror writer who's come after him. Seen the Evil Dead movies? All right, a lot of folks here. Army of Darkness, yeah, the Necronomicon was a Lovecraft invention. Stephen King has written Lovecraft stories. Good Lord, I was going to say Lumley, of course, but let's go with better horror authors. Ones we like more.
The ones we like more. Well, it's hard to find anybody that's not influenced by Lovecraft, and filmmakers are often plagued with the problem of trying to do Lovecraft exactly like Lovecraft. Will put them in the position of being accused of being derivative. That was one of the problems that they ran into in the latest film version of Dagon.
Thomas Ligotti, anyone heard of him?
Ah.
All right, yeah, he's very much influenced by Lovecraft, Campbell. There's a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of modern writers. You would think that Lovecraft, having been dead for about 70 years at this point, that most of his works would be in the public domain. You would think that. Unfortunately, copyright law has gotten really weird in the last 20 years or so. There's been bizarre extensions, exceptions, and the paper trail for who owns what is confusing, to say the least. And it's not just Lovecraft's work either. Robert E. Howard's work, interestingly enough, was thought to be pretty much all in the public domain around 2002. However, there is a company based in Sweden called Paragon Industries, a Swedish company. They have an American company set up over here called Conan Properties International. They claim to have bought all the rights to Howard's works, which is kind of interesting since we thought a lot of Howard's works were in the public domain. And we're in an interesting position where a Swiss company claims to own an American cultural icon, and they're using a Beverly Hills entertainment law firm to viciously enforce their copyright claims.
It's even more embarrassing because Robert E. Howard, was a Texan. Now we've got this Texas versus California dynamic. Nasty.
Lovecraft's situation isn't really any clearer. There are 3 different claimants to Lovecraft's property. The Arkham House has said at various points, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but in one of the, I think, Joshi books, there's talk about the gift to Arkham House of Lovecraft's intellectual property. Is that correct?
There is something in there. Joshi does maintain that the copyrights probably are in the public domain, but he does go into some of the questions about the various requests and so forth.
We've also got the executor to the Lovecraft estate, who is an entirely separate individual from Arkham House. Gentleman by
Robert C. Harrell.
Yes, thank you. Tell us a little bit about him, please.
I don't know too much about him. He's a distant relative.
Okay, distant relative. All right, well, okay. I may be
Dan, it's your job to know these things.
You're the librarian, damn it.
And why don't we talk about Alice Derleth while we're on this subject?
Alice Derleth is an interesting character. She is currently running Arkham House, and she seems to have issues with a lot of H.P. Lovecraft fans who post in news groups like Alt Horror Cthulhu, which is pretty much where the hardcore Lovecraft fans hang out. And you would think these would be the people that you would want to make nice with, since they're going to buy your books. But in my humble opinion, reading some of the rants that she's put online, I think she's kind of nuts.
Yeah. Her father got into bad odor with a lot of Lovecraft fans over his posthumous collaborations with Lovecraft. What that means is that he went through Lovecraft's notes, found an odd reference here and an outline there, and wrote something totally off the top of his head, and insisted that he had finished a story with Lovecraft, or that Lovecraft wrote it with him. By the way, how many people are fond of August Derleth? How many people know who August Derleth is?
2.
How many people have read any? There we go. Okay. And are willing to admit it. Okay. Not many fans. Hands up, who likes August Derleth? There we go. All right.
Like August, all of his stuff. Some of his stuff is actually pretty good. It's not mostly the mythos stuff.
Oh, okay.
I've read worse.
Okay. How many people would like to see August Derleth burn in hell? Here we go. Okay. Anyway, that's enough of that.
Let's not unleash the lawyers.
Yeah, really.
So we've got this bizarre situation where we've got multiple conflicting copyright claims. The paper trail is in a shambles. No one is really able or willing to offer up proof in the form of documentation showing that, yes, we do own these particular properties, which, let's admit it, if you don't actually own something but you've been making money for decades claiming that you do, it's not in your best interest to cooperate with people who say, well, show us the paperwork, show us proof of your claim. And instead, that legal threat is just left looming. And it's been used to generate quite a bit of revenue. Chaosium, the game company that makes Call of Cthulhu, bought a license from Arkham House, which apparently they did not need back in the 80s. And if you look at the earlier...
Hold on. They didn't buy the license. The license was, they just requested it. There wasn't, I don't think there was a transfer of funds involved with that. But they did have a license.
They did have a license, but I believe there was a significant licensing fee. We'll have to compare notes on that.
Okay.
This is trying to track this stuff down is kind of like being stuck in the middle of an H.P. Lovecraft story. Trying to figure out the rules and intricacies of the laws will drive you insane, and trying to find any firm documentation is like looking for a real copy of the Necronomicon itself.
And there are forbidden tomes that will make you lose your sanity, but it's not from reading them, it's trying to get them back into print that drives you crazy.
Did a little research and history on copyright in general and found some fun facts. Of course, 500-600 years ago, there wasn't really copyright as we have it. and we didn't have Gutenberg Press, so pretty much any book out there was a handwritten original or transcribed from a handwritten original. If someone didn't want another group or individual person stealing their work, they would inscribe what's known as a book curse in the front of the book, which is kind of interesting, which says basically if you steal my shit, then bad things will happen to you. Curse, 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 curse.
There's actually one at the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation, and we think the real reason for that is because scribal errors and plagiarism were so common in that day that it was really aimed at somebody else that might come by and monkey with the text or rip it off, rather than unbelievers who would come along and try to alter the Word of God, you know, this kind of thing. According to the book of Revelation, yeah.
So keep in mind that back then...
Either that or the Apostle John will show up demanding his permission money. I don't know.
So, Bible aside, keep in mind the Catholic Church really wanted to keep that firmly under control, because if only the Catholic Church can tell you the contents of this book that's written in a language that you don't speak or understand, then they've really got major control over you. Other books at the time, because they were pretty much handwritten individually, these were essentially works of art, like paintings, and they were valuable commodities, and therefore you wanted to protect this stuff. People who wrote and created these a lot of times were working under the patronage system, where you had someone create a work, a publication, and the noble or the ruler they were working for, who was their patron, owned it. Hence they were seen as art objects. The Gutenberg printing press comes along and really screws up that economic model, because suddenly it becomes very easy to create lots of copies of a single work. And you first start getting the inklings of copyright back around 1710 with the British Statute of Anne, which basically codified the rights of authors instead of publishers or the patrons as owners. The actual creators of the works had rights to these works. This kind of upset the economic boat in various places, and the British Statute of Anne pretty much applied only in Britain, and places outside such as Ireland, North America, even Scotland were not bound by this, so you could often find copies of books that might cost a fair amount of money in Britain printed in other places without paying royalties or fees, or basically pirated editions of British books. And again, this caused all sorts of interesting conflicts. 1774, British Parliament decided that it was not in the public's best interest for London publishers to control books forever, especially as the publishers kept prices artificially high. Hence, limited terms on copyright. It was also seen as a class issue, i.e., if only the rich were able to afford easy access to information, that was seen as very classist. And of course, the teeming, thronging masses, and middle class was developing by then, were kind of annoyed with this. Interesting parallels with the right to read and other bits of fiction that seemed kind of silly maybe 10 or 20 years ago, but now Stallman's looking smarter than we gave him credit for.
Would you say this was the copyright problems as a result of the first information revolution?
That's one way of looking at it. 1842, the British forbid import of foreign reprints of British works unless reciprocal agreements are made with other countries. Interestingly enough, the U.S. had no such agreements until the very end of the 19th and early parts of the 20th century. For a while, the United States was the largest pirate nation in the world as far as books and literature went. And in fact, many modern publishing houses that exist today got their start by ignoring everybody's copyrights outside the U.S. and essentially pirating the works of everybody else in the world.
As a matter of fact, our alma mater, Weiser, actually got started with Samuel Weiser, who was an infamous pirate of occult publications. Dan, you have any comments on that?
No.
Dan?
Run up here and yell it so we actually get the thing recorded.
Come here.
Oh, well, then just get out there and be Mike, bitch.
So, like, this is very much like the relationship between the United States and China today with respect to software. Today, the United States has very strict copyright regimes because there are a lot of big companies that make a lot of money here that are very powerful that have an interest in strong intellectual property protections, and other countries that are not in the same position are violating or not obeying those rules because they see an economic advantage to doing so. So that's interesting. Do I get a Cthulhu?
Yes, you get a Cthulhu ribbon. That's why you came up here.
For that excellent question and that excellent statement, you get one of our little Cthulhu icon pin-on ribbons here. And also a little handout that goes with it. There we go.
Tell me when. Oh, okay. So where were we next? Okay, 1842, forbid import, blah, blah, blah. The British were understandably pissed, and this actually led to the Berne Convention, 1886, which, again, the United States didn't actually sign until 1989. U.S. copyright stuff, if you look in the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, you will find the Intellectual Property Clause. Originally, copyright in the U.S. was... I didn't write that down because I had it memorized and now I've forgotten it because I'm an idiot. Was it 8 years with an option to renew for another 8 years, I believe, if I remember correctly, something like that? 14 and 14? That sounds good. Come get a Cthulhu ribbon. The copyright statutes weren't really monkeyed with much over the next 100, 150 years or so. But by the time we get around to Lovecraft, we're up to 28 years with an option to renew for another 28 years, which, okay, that's not 14 and 14, but still that's not terrible, maybe, possibly. And people did live, people did have shorter lifespans back then, so whatever.
I want to make an observation on the renewal, something I just found out yesterday. The other advantage of that was that if you had a book and you licensed it to somebody else, at that renewal time, the author had the opportunity to take that back, renew it in their own name. So if you signed away your rights to a story and it became really popular, after 28 years, you could get it back.
Was not aware of that.
Neither was I until yesterday.
That doesn't fall under the Uruguay Round Agreements Act, does it?
No, this is U.S. copyright law.
No, that is actually part of the Copyright Act of 1976. There's a subclause there called the Uruguay Round Agreements Act that no one seems to be willing to discuss, so I have no idea what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well. Prior to 1978, copyright was established the date you published your work with a copyright notice or the date of registration if it was registered unpublished. Again, as I said, first term 28 years with an option to renew for another 28 years after the first term. The Copyright Act of 1976 was the beginning of a sad, sad decline. I think that's probably the first time Disney had to worry about Mickey Mouse coming into the public domain. What this did was the Copyright Act of 1976 extended renewal from 28 to 47 years. They were adding an extra 19 years on there for copyrights that were in existence as of January 1st, 1978, or pre-1978 copyrights restored under the mysterious Uruguay Round Agreements Act. So, bonus beer for anyone who can tell me what the hell that thing is before the convention is over. We had Public Law 105-298, which was enacted on October 27th, 1998 after that, which extended the renewal terms of copyright still further by an additional 20 years. So we've added within... Your first 20-year term is getting close to coming up, so they just tacked another 20-year term on that. And who knows, another 20 years, we may see yet another 20-year term added onto that to continue to keep things that are currently under copyright in copyright.
Because the nice folks at Disney are determined that Mickey Mouse is not going to enter the public domain.
This causes a lot of confusion with these extensions. It's pretty cut and dried that anything that was prior to 1923 is in the public domain. And some of Lovecraft's earlier work is very clearly in the public domain. After that point, it gets kind of fuzzy. Lovecraft passed away in 1937. And due to the conflicting IP claims, maybe some of the stuff was renewed for a second term, maybe it wasn't. If it was, you have renewal clause, extension clause after extension clause kicking in. So not only are we trying to figure out who exactly owns what, we're trying to figure out what exactly was renewed when. The paper trail is not very clear because apparently you don't have to register a transfer of copyright from one owner to another through the Copyright Office. So there's a pretty good chance that some of the claims are legit and there's simply no official government record that the copyright was transferred except among the people who actually hold the copyrights. And it's kind of tough to force them to cough up the paperwork unless, I guess, you go to court. I'll comment on that in a little bit because I've been monopolizing stuff, so I'll let John and Daniel talk for a bit.
Daniel, do you have any comments on that?
Not right now.
Not right now, okay. Thank you so much. One of the interesting things that you run into with copyright material is the issue of what exactly constitutes fair use. You know, how much material can you quote in a book? How much material constitutes, you might say, the heart of a book, you know. If somebody puts together a book on a metaphysical subject and it basically all centers around some yogic technique or some magical technique or some funky way of breathing, and I simply quote that paragraph or two in a book that I've written, how liable am I to be sued, you know, for plagiarism? By the way, that's an interesting issue. If you steal from only one source, that's plagiarism, which is a terrible crime. If you steal from many sources, that's research, and that's a boon to the progress of human knowledge. I think that's an issue that we need to cover in some depth here. Daniel, do you have any comments on fair use?
Well, first I want to separate out infringement from plagiarism, because really these are two different things.
All right.
Infringement is a legal term, whereas plagiarism ends up being an ethical term. You can be a plagiarist without infringing, and you can infringe without being a plagiarist.
Okay,
So
how does that work?
We need to make that. Well, if you quote, say, half a book, and then you cite your source, you say, okay, this is where I got this, you're not a plagiarist.
Okay.
But you could be an infringer.
Okay, so you're basically publishing an enormous amount of this person's material even though you admitted where you got it. So at this point, you're essentially a publishing pirate, is that it? You're legally in trouble, but you're not ethically in trouble. Okay, I understand. Okay. One of the other big issues relative to copyrights comes with the... I like that illustration a great deal better. I really like that one a lot. Sorry, Daniel. One of the issues that we run into relative to copyrights are graphic issues. We ran into the headache of graphics. We ran into the headache of graphics when we were putting together Necronomicon files, and Daniel generously volunteered me as the person to handle all graphic illustrations. Thank you, Daniel.
You're quite welcome.
No problem. And so I got a quick crash course in publishing and graphics issues. Now, to kind of bring this down home, those of you who write, put together, organize, or otherwise use RPGs, no, not recoilless rifles. I'm talking about role-playing games. You may use illustrated handouts with graphic images, you know. If you put your game online, you may want to put those graphics on your website. By the way, congratulations. At this point, you're a web publisher, whatever that is. If you paper publish it, those graphic images will end up in a book. And that's where the real fun starts. See, when Dan Harms and I got the Necronomicon files published through Red Wheel Weiser, Weiser wanted documentation on every single picture or illustration used, and if a picture was in public domain, they wanted proof. They wanted documentation that it was in the public domain. If there was a picture or an image that was used with permission, they wanted documentation of the permission. They wanted forms filled out and signed by the owner. Okay. If we had ended up using a scanned image taken from a snapshot that my Uncle Bill had taken at Christmas, Uncle Bill would have to fill out the form and sign it and turn it into Red Wheel Weiser. Okay. He would have to sign the release form. Now, if the copyright owner was charging us for permission to use a picture, guess who had to pay to use that picture for publication? Just guess. That's right, the author. That's right. The authors, not the publisher, were responsible for procuring illustrations. In plain English, that means we had to fork over any money that had to be paid out for permissions to use copyrighted graphics. Publishers are no fools. They want a free ride like everybody else. Okay? Now, let's say, just for an example, that you want to use a picture of a statue or a carved bas-relief or a cylinder seal from ancient Assyria or Babylonia or classical Greece or whatever. You've decided that a picture of an Assyrian figurine of the demon god Pazuzu would be just the thing for that swell RPG that you're writing that's set in ancient Mesopotamia, or maybe it's set in an archaeological site in modern Iraq during the war, or whatever. Okay? And so, you know, you're reasonably sure that now, after 3,000 years, it's probably in the public domain. Okay? You're reasonably sure that the ancient Assyrian idol maker who sculpted the thing is not going to show up asking for his permission money, right? Okay. Okay. Now, you're pretty sure ancient Assyrian lawyers were real assholes, too. But you're reasonably sure that it's in the public domain. I mean, it's a picture of an ancient idol, right? So you're just going to slap it up on your website. No copyright troubles, right? Wrong. You cannot just automatically use a picture of an ancient sculpture. Why? Because somebody took that picture. Somebody in modern times. Somebody who's still alive. Somebody who wants his cut of the money. Okay? Because, he didn't sculpt the statue. He didn't dig it out of the ground. He's not an archaeologist. He probably has no clue about what the historical period or the significance behind the thing is. But he had something you didn't have. A camera in the right place at the right time. So, point, click, and drool. Do-do-do. I'm a creative artist. Where's my money?
One note on that.
Huh?
One note. That is not entirely bad. The reason.
No. It's not entirely bad, and I'm covering the reason why it's not. Now, there are all kinds of. Sit down. Now, there are all kinds of wonderful photographers that do magnificent work, and they've taken great pictures of ancient artifacts, and we wouldn't even know about them if they hadn't done that. And that's actually a way that museums make money, by selling the rights to images of artifacts that they have on display. And I'm all for creative artists, skilled artists, actually making money from their skills. And I'm all for museums being funded. But if you just happen to be a quote-unquote starving student, or you just happen to be quote-unquote between careers, or whatever kind of euphemisms we use for being broke, You might not be up to museum funding, huh? Right? I'm looking at you when I say this. Anyway, there's got to be a way around, giving these folks any money if we just don't have it to give, right? So you can appropriate graphic images off the web. I'm going to assume that everybody here is technologically competent enough to know how to do that and get away with it without taking any unwanted cookies along with it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to assume that everybody kind of knows how to go on Photoshop and screw around with an image to where they can change it by 70%.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to add to this is the idea that whatever you do with an image, your first step needs to be get rid of the background. I don't care how much you like it. I don't care how much, whether it's got little rainbows and Valentines on it, and you just love all that. Get rid of it. Okay. If you're reasonably skilled, you probably know how to do that. If you're not, if you're back in the Stone Age, you can make a photocopy and cut it out with a piece of scissors, a pair of scissors, But get rid of the background. In most cases, that will actually change the image by a reasonable 70%. This fine fellow here looks like he's got a question or a statement to make.
If you were to use someone else's picture of the statue to create a 3D model of the statue in the computer and then take a picture of it, if you were only using it for depth and you weren't actually using the photo for a texture map, couldn't you then say it was based on the original statue and not on the photograph?
They can't stop you at that point. It is, in fact, I believe, based on the original statue and not the photograph, Mr. Myers.
I would say it depends on who you piss off and how many lawyers they can throw at you.
Daniel, do you have any observations about that?
I think that last thing is an important point to make. It really does depend on who's got the money and where the money's going. If you're just putting up a Lovecraft story on your website, there's probably not going to be that much effort to get it down because you're not making any money off of it. You're not really competing with anybody, and you'll probably get away with that. But if things change, say like we're talking with the Howard Estates, a new owner comes in, things can change suddenly. I'd say if Guillermo del Toro gets around to putting together his At the Mountains of Madness movie, we might see a lot of action on Lovecraft copyrights that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah. Good point. Excellent point. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Not right
now. He was talking to me. Shut up. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You look at the death dates, and the current copyright laws are pretty much life of the author plus 70 years. Lovecraft passed away March 15th of 1937, so less than 6 months under current copyright laws, all of his stuff would be in the public domain that he wrote and had copyrighted while he was alive. Howard passed away June 11th of 1936, so theoretically, under these copyright laws, anything that he published prior to his death in 1936 would be in the public domain, one would think. Ways around this, though, would be to, I suppose, transfer the intellectual property to a corporation which gets extensions on their copyright laws. Right now, it's date of publication plus 95 years or date of creation if copyright was not assigned at publication, plus 120 years for corporations. That's where we're standing right now. Yeah, pretty much anything that's created by a corporation, and a corporation can be you and a buddy incorporating and releasing shared content under a publishing house. That's kind of how pagan publishing went. But yeah, anything created today will not go into the public domain until probably all of us are long dead. Yes, sir.
Oh. What about posthumously published works? Like, there was a Robert Frost, or I can't remember who it was, poem that was discovered like 2 years ago.
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, date copyright was actually assigned to it. And you notice, as I said, for corporate stuff, date of publication plus 95 years, or date of creation, assuming copyright was not assigned upon creation, plus 120 years. So yeah, that's a way to get around that and still get your maximum money's worth out of copyright. Did that answer your question?
Very good question. Actually, we cheated this gentleman. This gentleman had an excellent question. Come on down.
Now, interestingly, Australia seems to have saner copyright laws than we do. If you go to Project Gutenberg here in the U.S., if you go to Project Gutenberg here in the U.S., you're not going to find Lovecraft or Robert E. Howard stuff. However, if you go to gutenberg.net.au, yes, Australia, you will find many works by Lovecraft and Howard, which are in the public domain in Australia. But of course, we as Americans could never, never, never download and read that stuff because that would be violating international copyright law. So don't do it. It's naughty, 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 bad. Jim, stop calling me, goddammit.
If the publishing house were to sell the rights to another entity shortly before their time expired, would the new entity be bound by the old copyright, or would they get another extension?
Both, depending on how this was done. And this is a very interesting question. The Lovecraft stuff has increasingly slid into the public domain despite the claims of various individuals. If you get online, you can find Wikisource has many of Lovecraft's stories. There are some that are there's a very clear copyright trail on them. Lovecraft's first sales to Weird Tales, he didn't realize he could simply give them first printing rights and keep everything else for himself, so those were essentially work for hire. Weird Tales owned those. The paper trail is pretty clear. After that, we think, again, it gets kind of murky, you need access to the source documents here, that he kept all other rights aside from first publication rights for himself. Now, in the case of Arkham House, notice that they've been using texts that are going to be coming into the public domain in under 6 months, in theory, possibly, maybe, depending on who else files claims against them. What Arkham House has done is, with the help of, what's the guy's name, Joshi?
S.T. Joshi.
Joshi. I keep wanting to call him Saint Joshi. S.T. Joshi. S.T. Joshi went through and made many corrections. The original Weird Tales publications of these stories, there was a lot of really poor editing. Stuff was changed without Lovecraft being consulted. Sentences rearranged, cut up, mutilated, bent, fold, spindled, all that kind of stuff. Joshi went through and cleaned up a lot of these texts, and in many cases was able to refer to original source documentation and kind of get what Lovecraft actually wrote out there, and that's what Arkham House is publishing now. Well, these corrected texts, it gets interesting. Are they derivative works based on the original? Is this something entirely new that's going to be protected by Arkham House under copyright for another 95 to 120 years? Or is it only the corrections that are protected under copyright? You can get into some really weird cases of hair splitting there, and I was wondering if you took the original, if the original text from Weird Tales actually go into the public domain in under 6 months, someone could simply buy the corrected and annotated, authentic, official, approved versions from Weird Tales, which will be under, from Arkham House, which will be under copyright for around another century. Scan them in and simply do a diff file between the new corrected versions and the original Weird Tales versions. You could distribute the original and kind of shoddily edited Weird Tales versions and have diff files stuck somewhere and simply take your original poorly edited ones and the diff files and create your own Joshi corrected text without having to buy anything from Arkham House. In theory. Of course, no one evil would ever do such a thing.
Well, actually, a question on that. If it is indeed the actual full text of the corrected that is copyrighted, would the diffs be considered under copyright?
Again, that's the question. Is the actual full corrected text copyrighted? Because substantial portions of it are identical with the original Weird Tales kind of poorly edited versions.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, would it be legal, assuming that the full text of the new versions was copyrighted, would it be legal to just distribute the diffs? At which point you could contain it as an entire package.
Depends on where you host them.
Okay, that's a very good question. And Mr. Harms, do you have any insights about that?
Well, one thing to bear in mind is that if you edited text can in of themselves contain a copyright. So even if, say, all the text in an Arkham House book are public domain, you can't just reprint the book because all of those texts, then the particular way they're assembled is copyrightable. You can copyright a book even if you can't copyright all the text in there. Also, there is some allowance for editing. I think that technically, if you scanned in the text and put them on a disk, you would be in violation of copyright if those were the corrected text.
Interesting.
But if you're evil and you just don't give a shit, then yeah, you can go that route.
Has anybody ever seen the electronic Sumerian text corpus? They have ancient cuneiform texts transliterated into English in Unicode. Well, they have them in ASCII as well. But you just click on the text, and the English translation comes up. And go back to the Sumerian text. What do you think?
I'm sorry, I was playing with the computer. I missed the question.
No, actually, you were playing with yourself. I saw you. Anyway. All right, stick out your hand. Here we go. Stick out your hand. Sorry, I had to slap your wrist first.
Jim, stop calling me. Yeah, as Daniel mentioned, the actual arrangement of a collection, essentially the table of contents of a specific collection, can be copyrighted, which begs the question, 15 minutes, we're good. Which begs the question, why not simply take all of the titles from the Lovecraft text and create a script that automatically assembles them in every possible combination and then copyright all of those? I mean, granted, you'd be copywriting a hell of a lot of stuff, but, and then I'm sure that the Government Copyright Office would be rather unhappy with you. But again, this is one of these bizarre legal loopholes where if you can copyright particular collections of stories and short stories, then what's to prevent you from using a computer to do the stupid, boring, repetitive task of creating every single possible combination of every story collection? I've got some ideas for ways to possibly resolve pleasantly or unpleasantly and forcibly determine the copyright status of some of these works once and for all. Robert E. Howard's stuff was researched rather thoroughly back in 2002 by a gentleman named Paul Herman. He's apparently an IP, copyright, trademark lawyer for Halliburton. And in fact, that Halliburton, paul.herman@halliburton.com. His email address is freely available on the interweb, so I'm not giving away any secrets. And basically his conclusion was that the only signs that he could find of Howard's works really being renewed were back in the 1950s by a corporation that was a successor in interest to one of the magazine companies that had published Howard's work. This company disappeared, pretty much went under in 1959, and there's no sign that anything was ever done with the copyrights. They were transferred. Anything else after that, the paper trail simply ends. Which, granted, it is possible that rights were transferred to other individuals, and some of the many individuals who were claiming to own the copyrights could have, in fact, owned the copyrights on Howard's stuff. However, you'd need to see the paper trail, which so far hasn't happened. This Swiss company that came in and bought up, amid much fanfare and hoopla, all the rights to Howard's works last year, Paradox International, and as I said, the U.S. parent, the U.S. company that they have set up is Conan Properties International, and claims that they own all the copyrights on all of Robert E. Howard's stuff. How many of you followed the Tiger Telemetrics, Gizmondo, Stephen Erickson stories earlier this year? This was .com fleece investors, raise a lot of capital and skip out of the European Union over to the U.S., and there's a lot of crazy stuff happened from that involving very expensive Ferraris, bizarre alliances with Orange County Transit Authority that bust around.
Don't forget the automatic weapons.
I'm getting to that. That bust around basically old people and handicapped people, where they set themselves up through a little arrangement as the security force for this transit authority so they could get access to automatic weapons.
Show us that bus card or you're dead.
And Ericsson seems to have been pretty much thrown to the wolves by the rest of the Swedish mafia. They pretty much set sail in their private yachts from an Orange County marina with automatic weapons, gold bullion, and all sorts of other stuff about 12 hours before the feds could get hold of them. And the reason I mention all of this, Paradox Entertainment, Conan Properties International, blah, 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 is that some of the names involved with Paradox Entertainment and Conan Properties International are very, very similar to the names of people who were involved with Tiger Telemetrics and Gizmondo. Has the Swedish mafia laid claim to Conan and yanked it out of the public domain, and are they enforcing their claims to this intellectual property via a Beverly Hills entertainment law firm that viciously goes after anyone who questions their claims? I have not been able to determine the accuracy of this or not, although, because I can't read Swedish for one thing. But it's an interesting trail I'm going to continue to follow up, because that just seems too damn bizarre to make up. The Swedish mafia has possibly stolen Conan. Whoa.
By Crom.
Well, I want to make a comment on that.
Go for it.
When we talk about the Swedish mafia, well, first of all, it's all alleged. We don't want them to come to our houses or anything. Yeah. So, but when you compare the present copyright holders' attitude towards the old copyright holders, the old alleged copyright holders, they're doing much better, actually. Because one of the main copyright holders at back then was Elspeth de Camp, and as part of the agreement, worked it out so that if he published pastiches of Howard's stories, that stories based on the same mythos, but not Howard's originals, he made more money than if he published the Howard stories themselves. So what would happen is you'd see in the bookstores all sorts of Robert Jordan and other authors who are using Conan in their stories. You'd see all these books, but you very rarely see Howard himself. So actually the new copyright holders might actually be better for it than some of the people who've had it before.
So you think they might actually suffer for their hubris of trying to steal Conan, then?
Well, I don't know about
If
that.
that's the case. We're not sure.
But as readers, we may be better off.
I see what you mean.
With the new guys and the old guys.
Well, I don't know. I kind of disagree. I mean, public domain to me means public domain in that I thought public domain, correct me if I'm wrong, means that no one can tell you what the fuck you can do with it or can't do with it. Public domain means to me that it's out there. You can republish it if you want. You can put it on a website. The works of Shakespeare are very clearly in the public domain and has been mined for all sorts of stuff for hundreds of years. If Lovecraft and Howard stuff is in the public domain, why do I have to deal with the Swedish mafia? Why do I have to go through with 3 different claimants and pay licensing fees to a whole bunch of people who might sue me just to ensure that I don't get sued? That strikes me as very much like being forced to contribute to a protection racket or something like that.
Absolutely. I'm just saying that if I had to choose between those two owners, I'd go with the new ones at this point as a reader.
My thoughts on some of this stuff were, first thing that ought to be done is a Mythos copyright wiki needs to be set up, where a bunch of different people have done a lot of research over the last 5 years, and there's bits and pieces scattered all over the web. There's no central clearinghouse for this type of stuff for people to collaborate and contribute bits of the puzzle that they find. Something else I was thinking of possibly is maybe setting up some sort of ransom for legal fees where you simply go through, this is America. You can sue anybody here, right? So go ahead and sue the copyright claimants and file a motion for discovery and force them to cough up their fucking paperwork to prove that they actually own the properties. If they can't do that, it makes their claims a whole lot weaker. Of course, I'm not a lawyer. I can't do this. Hence the set up an internet ransom for all the Lovecraft and Conan fanatics and various and sundry other people to maybe even find a lawyer or two who's a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, horror fiction, whatever, would be willing to donate some time to this. I don't know. I mean, it's a crazy scheme. Maybe it's not, but it's something I'm going to toy around with until someone either sues me, tells me to stop, and threatens to kill me or something.
They can't stop you even if they sue you. Maybe with a bullet, you know. I think in summation, the real issue here is the relative to copyrights is that copyright law was originally a good thing. That was designed to protect the rights of artists. It was designed to protect the rights of authors. As my colleague, Mr. Myers, pointed out, back in at a certain time in the 18th century, the 19th century, anybody could publish anything and get away with it, you know, without giving the author any payment whatsoever. But now copyright law has been doing more lately to protect the profits of corporations than it does the rights of artists. Am I not correct?
Yeah, locking things up to benefit a few at the expense of everyone else. Questions? Ask them.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Can you not get around this by just padding the trailing end of a work of fiction with zeros so that the original work is now 30% and is not 70%?
That's a good idea, but again, are you willing to deal with the lawyers who might come after you?
I think, are we talking about text?
That's still a good enough question to rate a Cthulhu icon. Here you go, there we go, and make sure he gets his... Yes, sir.
The term piracy that's been, you know, kind of recently been thrown about and applied to this and
overused.
Yeah, exactly. How about early American history, you know, back in the 18th century, 19th century.
When they were real pirates.
Right. What was Britain accusing us of? Did they bandy about some term for it?
Basically, we were reprinting British works and not sending them any royalties.
So did they call us a name for that? You know, did they come up with a buzzword? Was there anything like that?
Damn Yanks, I guess. You know, but anybody could print anybody, for example, could publish Dickens. Right. Some guy that, you know, some transient that lived on the steamboats up and down the Mississippi could publish Dickens, you know, and get away with it.
Britain did respond by printing U.S. works without paying U.S. authors, and Mark Twain was really pissed off about that, for instance. Yeah, keep in mind that back around the 18th and early part of the 19th century, we were the Australia of the world in that we were the criminal leper colony where everyone sent their social rejects and misfits, and we're the descendants of the people who were kicked out of polite countries all over the world. And then Australia picked up the torch.
Good stuff.
Great. That was a good question. Here. Yes, sir.
Okay. I was having a discussion with someone about the length of copyright being a problem, and they brought up a good question. What length of copyright is not a problem? What's a good length for copyright?
I like the original. 14 plus an option to renew for 14 if you file the paperwork. None of that automatic renewal bullshit.
But
okay. Daniel, ideas?
Is that your personal... Oh, sorry.
I'd say I would go for life plus 10 or life plus 20 because it's long enough for the author's family to get taken care of.
We're the family. They didn't create the works. Hey, look, if you've got 28 fucking years and you can't figure out a way to profit from it and pass some of that on to your family, put it in the...
Gentlemen.
They already get the profit. They already get the passed on profit anyway. We got tax laws.
Gentlemen, order. Gentlemen, and I use the word loosely. Is that the end of your question?
Well, basically, but how do you justify that to other people other than this is my personal opinion, it should be 14 plus 14 years?
Fists, guns, and chainsaws.
You left out flamethrowers. That was a good question. Here, have a
artistic
Cthulhu
equivalent
icon.
of the World War I aircraft problem with
here we go. Yes, you have a question.
Yes. Does foreign language translation extend to copyright?
Beat the fuck out of me. Ask a lawyer.
That was still a good question. Here, have an icon.
Hold on.
Daniel. Answer. Whoa, here we go.
It does consent to copyright. I'm not exactly sure what the breakdown is, but I think both the original author and the translator have some role in there. Usually that's defined by a contract.
Okay. Last question.
This isn't a question, it's a comment. Some of the people... No, fuck you. Some of the people here may already be aware of this, but there is a website called Eldred.cc where this guy who is a professor at Stanford University has first of all previously sued to say that the most recent copyright term extension by the United States government was unconstitutional, and he lost that lawsuit, but now he's suing the latest lawsuit has something to do with works that are orphaned, and basically some sort of agreement that if the work is orphaned, then copyright doesn't apply. But there's for people who are interested in copyright extension and what a reasonable length of copyright is, etc. That's a really good resource, and they're trying to.
Thanks.
That was one of the claims for the Howard stuff being in the public domain, was that if in fact no other renewals had been done since 1959, then the work was orphaned. And if anyone wants to...
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for attending. By the way, I want to encourage everybody to buy this swell book, co-authored by myself and Mr. Harms, the Necronomicon files. We just happen to have 2 clean copies here today. It made so many waves that somebody wrote a rebuttal book called Dead Names. They hate us so much. It's hilarious. And I was given congratulation emails by cult cops, by occultists saying, "Hey man, these guys hate your guts. Good going." And don't forget to read Daniel Harm's forthcoming reissue of his Encyclopedia Cthulhiana when it comes out, my forthcoming book, The Apocalypse of Ishtar, and visit my forthcoming website, inannatemple.com.
And buy my gaming stuff when it's published.
And thank you very much.